My guest today is Russ Schneider, Director of the Storage Systems Practice for Jeskel. Russ, welcome to the program today.
Thank you, Jason. Glad to be here.
So we're here to talk about data storage. Tell me the problems that federal agencies are facing in this regard.
Well, federal IT spending over the last 5 years has decreased 2.4% annually. And faced with that drop in funds available for infrastructure, acts are now putting tremendous pressure on federal agencies to secure data, to store data, and to analyze data. And nobody really has their house 100% in order. A recent survey by the President's Council for Science and Policy determined that fewer than 6% of civilian agencies and 2.4% of defense agencies actually felt that they were doing an adequate job addressing their data and data security needs. So, faced with that problem and faced with the fact that unstructured data, which is the data everybody wants to analyze today to spot terrorists, to determine who's cheating on their Medicare, faced with that unstructured data, which now represents about 31% of the total federal data that's being stored, that data is growing at 6 times the rate of structured data. So all of a sudden we have this explosion where 2.5 trillion bytes of new data are being created every day. And that data is being created faster than agencies can figure out how to store it, how to secure it, at what appropriate storage tier it needs to be stored on. And I liken this to maybe your house, okay, which is a good analogy. I'm sure that you have things around your house like a deed to a car or a vehicle that should be in a safe deposit box, but they're not, okay? And that's analogous to the type of data that really should be secured, encrypted, and have very restricted access to that type of data. Then there are things that you use every day, like maybe your toothbrush that needs to be at hand where you can get to it quickly. And that's analogous to data like transactional records that are used every day to manage, run, and operate the agencies. Then we have data that might be needed occasionally. And that's analogous to things like a serving plate you might have to take out when company comes. You need to store those things and that type of data where you don't need to get it immediately, but you do need to get it in a reasonable amount of time when it is needed. And that type of data needs to be stored on storage systems where it might take a minute or two to retrieve that data. And a good example might be somebody goes in and asks for their Social Security record. It's acceptable that that's not available for 20 seconds. But when somebody puts a card into a machine, they expect to see a screen come up in less than a second, and if they don't, they're troubled. Then we have the other type of data, which is analogous to the things that you really should clean out of your garage, and you should put them in boxes, and you should put labels on them, and you should probably store them up in the attic. And that type of data, that type of storage is analogous to archival storage. And every agency has data around that really should be stored in containers like that with labels on it. It's never going to be accessed again. Recent survey by IBM showed that over 80% of data today is inactive and will never be used again, never be accessed again, never be opened again. But because of regulatory requirements, accounting requirements, legal requirements, and the various acts that the agencies are faced with, much of that data has to be kept for 7 years or longer.
So I want to go back to something for a minute that you talked about, which is this exponential growth of data. Talk to me about the pressures and the effects that that has on the storage environment in which that data lives.
Well, the storage that we were delivering to agencies 5-10 years ago was based on custom engineered, what we called monolithic cabinets. And the model was that every 3 years you outgrew that cabinet. Nothing looks older, for example, than a 3-year-old computer. We all know that from our PC experience, right? Okay. So these 3-year-old data systems became too slow and too small. They just could not hold the data with the growth that the agencies were facing. So every 2 to 3 years, they had to do a new acquisition, select a new storage product, install a new storage product, migrate the data, and learn how to use a new storage product. And those changes are expensive, they're time-consuming, and they take a lot of staff that should be working on more important things. So we needed a new model, and we were looking around for one. And actually, the industry all of a sudden woke up and realized what had happened in Silicon Valley. And if you follow companies like Facebook and Google and eBay, what those types of organizations did when they started with a single server that was based on commoditized x86 architecture. Okay, so they had basically Intel-based motherboards in there, or AMD-based motherboards, and they had commoditized disk drives that were coming out of the PC market and being built in quantities of the millions. And using those commoditized storage servers that you could buy at any PC store, somebody like Mark Zuckerberg started with one of those. And then when more people used that Facebook account in 2 or 3 weeks, he went and added a second one and a third one. And those companies looked at our monolithic storage systems and they said, no dice. And they went and developed their own storage software to sit on top of that commoditized hardware layer. And we as an industry saw that model coming out of Silicon Valley with these leading edge companies in the internet and social media space, and we said that's the answer to building the storage systems that will solve the data growth problems that exist in the federal agencies today. So we went back and we scrapped our R&D budgets that were being devoted to those monolithic storage products, and we started refocusing the R&D investments and the futures investments on developing a software-defined layer that would sit on top of the commoditized x86-based hardware. And that's the type of product that's hitting the market today, and that's the type of solution that's going to solve these problems at some point.
Russ, a good conversation start here that we're having today. We're going to pause for a short break and come back and pick up on that in just a minute. My guest today is Russ Schneider. He is the director of the Storage Systems Practice for Jeskel on the future of data storage, sponsored by Jeskel. I'm your host, Jason Fornicola, and you're listening to federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.